Mr. Torrance, should we be hearing you at this time? This is Dr. Brown.
Hi, Dr. Brown. Good afternoon. Do you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now, sir. Thank you. Good evening.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting in just a few moments.
One question, did you receive my email?
I know there were several emails that were sent to the main
Email,
link.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Mr. Carvalho.
I trust everyone is healthy, strong, and safe. It's great to see Eric. I'm sure you're doing your yoga for today.
I pulled weeds this morning.
That too is relaxing.
Oh, absolutely.
I've been pulling weeds for the past 3 months.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite pastimes.
Amazing. Hello, Mercy. It's great to see Mindy.
You too, thank you.
Carla will be there soon. Eileen, great to see you. Judy, Dr. Schechter. Dr. Gwen, great to see you.
Good afternoon.
Bobby Martinez, one of the most diversified people I know. I recently learned that he's taken up cooking. We'll wait on the invitation. Dr. Rupp, thank you so much for joining us. We have a number of staff members here today as well, senior staff. Dr. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us. And now I just lost the view of all the participants, so I cannot continue to acknowledge, but you know who you are. Thank you so much. I know that either representatives of or board members themselves are in attendance. And I want to greet our chair, vice chair, and every single board member who is monitoring. I know today's conversation and interaction is being monitored also by the community at large. We believe that this is an issue of such importance that we actually promoted this conversation for the benefit of the community. So let me welcome once again all of you and particularly extend my sincere appreciation for the time and talent that you continue to put into this very important work as we continue to improve, perfect this important plan. I have to say that I am happy that we rolled out the approach to this work in the way we did, because we find ourselves, quite frankly, with almost a finalized plan, but one that has benefited from information that is real, timely, actual, and ever-changing. So there are some elements of the plan that, based on the specific evolution of this virus, we've been able to adapt to it. The work of this group is critically important as our school system finalizes its reopening plan. And quite frankly, it continues to align with the four guiding principles that orient all of our work. Number one, ensuring the safety, the security, the well-being, the wellness of our students and staff. Secondly, developing high-quality instruction to students regardless of the delivery model that they select or their parents select. Third, providing parents the flexibility and choice based on the responses we receive from the parent survey conducted in May. And last but not least, optimizing the use of limited resources. It is clear to us that this health crisis will lead an economic crisis that will soon follow. We know that that will happen. As you know, the past two meetings have provided an opportunity for our system to present our our initial thoughts and preliminary plans to you. You've all received the information presented most recently, a very extensive deck with over 70 pages. And I hope that you've had a chance to review it a little bit more deeply, a little bit more closely. The information that was included touched on PPE for students and staffs, sanitation stations at entry points and common areas. A critical issue for us, the consistent cleaning and maintenance of HVAC systems. By the way, we have replaced in excess of 41,000 AC filters across the school system. We did that during the closure. All chiller plants have been serviced. We have maximized fresh air intake to assist with ventilation. We're currently evaluating the most efficient filter rating for our HVAC systems because obviously there are significant health benefits associated with that. The shutting down of water fountains and the progressive installation of water bottle filling stations is something that we are also progressing with. Additionally, we know that behavior, and this is something that I read from some of the correspondence that some of you sent, and I recall a document from Dr. Schechter that maybe one of the most important things we can do is ensuring that behavior is one of the most critical levers in ensuring a safe schooling experience, particularly during this crisis, particularly as we reopen. Therefore, we will be further enhancing our training for staff, students, and parents regarding sanitization, personal hygiene practices, behavioral interaction practices to reduce risk. We're also redoubling our efforts to ensure that the social and emotional well-being of staff and students is addressed with raised awareness, services, as well as support mechanisms to identify and address the accompanying stress and anxiety associated with these changing and challenging times. We know for a fact that sometimes there's a lag between the manifestation of those behaviors and the actual crisis. I have a feeling that this is going to be a long, hot summer with graphs and headlines that may not necessarily explicitly convey all the information people need to have. Confusion will ensue. We are committed to continuing to provide accurate information that is science, health, data-based, and nothing else. We here at our school system greatly value the tremendous expertise of this group. And it's always been our intent to have members of our community involved in our planning process. We want to focus today's meeting, however, on identifying and discussing those elements that you believe are still missing from our plan, including possible mitigation strategies, go a little bit deeper into contact tracing, and obviously the much anticipated conversation and announcement of the final instructional models. After which we will open for additional discussion. So today, do not expect me or staff to say a whole lot. We will cover some slides to touch on some questions that were previously posed, advance some additional conversations, I said, regarding mitigation strategies, contact tracing, and then the instructional models that our community is so eager to hear about. We, in the end, we will present to you 3 models with 4 different experiences. And I think you would expect this, particularly since you are aware, as we presented the last time, of the results from the parent survey. And we are a choice district where parents have the power to make decisions and select the best course of action for their children. The 3 models that you'll see with the 4 different experiences will revolve around a schoolhouse daily attendance model, for those parents, those children who must have their kids in school, children who have a certain degree of fragility or parents' circumstances who cannot provide for the supervision of children. And understand from my philosophical perspective, our own CAO, we as an educational institution, the most effective, efficient, rewarding educational experience exists when a child and a teacher are in a same protective environment. Obviously, with all the protective mitigating steps that we will be taking. So the very first model, again, is a schoolhouse daily attendance model. The second and third are hybrid models, blending e-learning and schoolhouse attendance, but being careful for the maintenance of specific cohorts of students, as some of you urged us to do last time we spoke. And then the last model, the fourth model, is the My School Online, which is an all distance learning model for the parents who may choose so, knowing that right now, last year and years prior, parents in our community have selected that model. This is not new. Obviously, there will be significant enhancements provided with all the models that are being provided. There will be protocols for parents to transition their students between models to provide flexibility as circumstances evolve. That was clear from the conversation you've had with us. Our intent is to provide parents maximum but reasonable flexibility within the constraints of the reality as posed to us, with the ability to pivot to necessary realistic scenarios based on environmental conditions specific to the South Florida community, specific to Miami-Dade. Let us not forget that, as opposed to the rest of the state, South Florida is still in phase one. Models 1 and 2 assume we are opening in phase 2, with the understanding that there is a regression to, we are in phase 2. The models we are presenting assume a phase 2 reality, but also expect or allow for a quick pivoting based on a possible regression to phase 1 or a transition to phase 3 should conditions modify or improve significantly. So as we discussed at our meeting earlier this week, we have reviewed a lot of different guidance, some from the CDC, some from the governor, some from the county, and some from the Florida Department of Education, which has really been the entity that has provided the most specific guidance in terms of how we are to operate schools. And by the way, it is clear for the group to understand that at this point, based on information from the Florida Department of Education, there are significant funding constraints associated with federal support to Miami-Dade County Public Schools and other states that rely heavily on summer and future interaction specific to the way schooling will occur based on face-to-face. That means actual physical presence of students. We are negotiating additional flexibility, but that is a process that's ongoing. Given our local conditions compared to the rest of the state, and some of you have actually provided us with your insights on this matter, as part of our implementation plan, there are several mitigation strategies that we in our system will utilize. These include social distancing, which the Florida Department of Education, as you see on that chart, acknowledges may not be feasible, at least not at 6 feet in all circumstances. As a result of this, face masks, face coverings will be ubiquitous throughout our operations, particularly on school buses and in confined spaces where less than 6 feet of distancing is not possible, feasible, or practicable. As far as face masks, though the Florida Department of Education is not mandating face coverings, their use here in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and based on the strong medical health expert advice, will be strongly encouraged, particularly not only for the general population, but particularly for medically vulnerable staff and students. As part of our implementation plan, masks will be required for students entering or exiting school campuses, during changing of classes, using the restrooms, and participating in selective activities. Masks or a type of acceptable face covering will be optional in the classroom, assuming the 6 feet of distancing is maintained. Masks will be required for staff and students in instances where 6 feet of social distancing is not feasible, unless the installation of appropriate see-through partitions is in place at that time. Currently, the county and a number of municipalities have taken steps to mandate the wearing of face coverings outside of the home. If these orders are in place at the time of school reopening or are reinstated during the school year, we will fully comply with these local orders. Understand that this plan is intended to be implemented again in phase 2 when requirements are less restrictive and the use of face covering is optional. But we believe, listening to the working group last time we spoke, even though it is an optional practice, it is absolutely a necessary one based on the conditions that I described. Temperature checks have also been something that we have been thinking through closely, particularly because there are many establishments in a local community that actually require them. However, the guidance from the Florida Department of Education regarding temperature checks is actually specific to plans for graduations, sports, band, arts, extracurricular activities, and co-curricular activities. If you look at the chart, it specifically highlights that the guidance is actually specific to adults, not children, and it is merely something districts are to consider. Temperature checks were also a topic of conversation during our last meeting. And this is also something that we have been fortunate enough to have some of you weigh in on, not only during the meeting, but via correspondence, particularly medical entities who were really strong on this issue. We understand the points that have been raised about the risks of having a large number of students essentially crowding each other as they wait to have their temperature checks. Not only from the perspective of contamination, but also other aspects of safety and security as students enter buildings, particularly through restricted points of entrance or single point of entry. As part of our implementation plan, we will not be requiring student temperature checks upon arrival into the building. However, we will ask parents, strongly encourage parents to perform temperature checks on their children at home, encouraging them to keep students at home if they show any signs of illness. Additionally, if a student arrives at school and appears ill, a temperature check will be conducted on the student and appropriate health protocols will be followed. The guidance provided by the Florida Department of Education explicitly mentions the need for districts to consider a contact tracing protocol.
No hay apuro. ¿Cómo son las papitas de ella? ¿Cómo es? A ver si está menudo. Está menudo.
Please silence all participants. There's some interference. So as I said, the Florida Department of Education guidance, which is explicit above, mentions the need for the districts to consider a contact tracing protocol. These are to be developed in conjunction with local health departments. To that end, the department is providing schools access to a tool, a powerful tool, Navigate 360. This is a health screening tool which provides screening questions based on CDC guidelines, allows for daily self-screening or assisted screening for the younger children, saves time checking and allowing students and staff in the building, and includes actually an option to use check-in, check-out for contact tracing. This technology also generates reports that roll up to the dashboard with real-time data at the classroom, school site, regional, and district levels. As part of our implementation plan, we are exploring how we can leverage Navigate 360 in all of our schools. Additionally, because we're not going to stop there, we are aggressively exploring the use of a health information and data management solution that is essentially an early warning system for physical, mental, and behavioral health aligned to CDC guidelines and providing for the necessary privacy guaranteed under HIPAA and FERPA. But basically, it comprehensively and easily collects data on students, families, and possibly school staff with the appropriate protocols followed. Symptoms, testing, immunity, as well as other information, both in and out of school. Educates, implements, and enforces practices to increase safety and reduce risk. This tool provides comprehensive tracking, reporting, and oversight at the state, district, regional, and school levels to help us in the decision-making process on partial opening, partial closure, quarantine, and re-entry processes. It supports critical contact tracing efforts for a population less likely to have smartphone access. So a more equitable way of addressing the needs of all students and their parents. And it supports obviously mental and behavioral health issues among students, which is always a top priority for us. Now I'd like to briefly discuss contact tracing and what it will actually look like in Miami-Dade County Public Schools. So the slide you're looking at follows not only common sense, but actually the specific guidelines and recommendations from CDC, best practices at the international level, World Health Organizations, but also local and state health department. Number one, if there is a student showing symptoms while in school, that student is moved to a pre-designated isolation room. The same is done if a student, upon entering the school, is detected with some type of symptom that may be indicative of illness. If there's a need, the parent, the guardian, is contacted to pick up the student from the school. The student is asked a series of health screening questions. A physical screening is conducted, including a temperature check. There is a recommendation to allow the student to actually rest for 10 minutes and see if the symptoms improve. If the symptoms are not changed, then obviously that all important outreach to the parent and guardian is in fact continued. If the child is picked up, immediate notification to the chief health officer, a position we discussed that's currently advertised, and we are accepting applications to fill fairly soon, as well as school operations. The chief health officer will advise the school on sanitation procedures. The chief health officer will also coordinate with the Department of Health and discuss the possibility of initiating an investigation prior to confirmation of the case. School operations will then be tasked with monitoring the local situation. If the student is confirmed as being positive, then school site administrator will immediately initiate an investigation and contact tracing with oversight and direction from the district. Obviously, identification of staff, students, volunteers, anyone that has had contact with the student, identification of areas of the building that the student may have traveled to or through, identification if the student has siblings and what schools they attend, and initiating the same process at those sites, identification of which employees had contact with the student. The results of the contact tracing investigation are then reported to school operations and the chief health officer. The chief health officer then will create immediate recommendations following a protocol for appropriate shuttering, closure of classroom, school space, entire school, or schools, depending on the possibility of siblings in other schools, in addition to the determination in collaboration with the health department of how many days of closure will ensue, as well as the protocols for cleaning and sanitization that will follow. Notification, obviously, of the Florida Department of Health will take place, and collaboration on the contact investigation, contact tracing with possible testing of additional entities. School site administrator at this point will follow all of the guidance from the Florida Department of Health for school and community notification. We as a school system have designed a contact tracing system to quickly identify all students and staff who have potentially been exposed in the event of a confirmed positive case. While we strive to provide an enriched student experience, that's our goal, it is critically important to maintain updated records of the whereabouts of the students to quickly, swiftly execute effective contact tracing. And this includes, minimally, time spent participating in partner programs, magnet programs, vocational programs, students who may be enrolled in dual enrollment programs at Miami-Dade College or FIU or other institutions, access to the classroom rosters, extracurricular activities, district transportation route and point of contact with anyone during that process. The district is also evaluating technology platforms to support our screening and automate the contact tracing efforts. This is part of our health management tool that I referenced earlier. This automated system will allow for the much faster, expedited response from the school site, district, and health department with access to real-time data, which then will be pushed out as appropriate to mainstream media for broad dissemination. We're obviously doing this work not only within conditions that rapidly change, and our ability to pivot within them is critical, but also considering that there's a great deal of uncertainty where we stand right now and certainly over the next 2 months prior to the opening of schools. Let's now consider the decision timeline that we are adopting, because we know that time is not our friend. Time is not our friend, not only because of all the work that still must take place, but time is not our friend from the perspective of the uncertainty of the evolution of this virus. Meaning, if there is a significant shift in terms of identified cases in Miami-Dade or the South Florida community, the plans that we have in place, even though they are malleable and flexible to adaptation, may need to be revisited. So we develop plans and a decision timeline that follows that level of uncertainty and our ability to very nimbly pivot from condition to condition. During our last meeting, if you recall, we discussed how no model is ideal, particularly as they relate to student experience other than the traditional pre-COVID model of instructional delivery. My friends, and for particularly the educators who are listening, and the parents, I think we can all agree that face-to-face instruction in physical environment that allows for the organic interaction, the differentiated instruction, the individualized attention that a teacher can provide in a classroom setting is irreplaceable. To that end, we strive to return our students back to the schoolhouse, but we recognize that given the fact that we are still in phase 1 and increases in positive cases in the last several weeks, parents may remain rather apprehensive about sending their children back to brick and mortar schools if we are still in phase 2 on August 24th. In response to parents and guardians that may be somewhat uneasy about sending their children to school despite safety measures being implemented, we will be offering non-schoolhouse options to parents during phase 2. Again, our goal is to enter phase 3 when that happens and return all students back to the schoolhouse, with exception, obviously, of those parents who have their children enrolled on Florida Virtual School or Miami-Dade Online. But even those will have the option to return to a physical environment when we actually reach in Miami-Dade a phase 3 condition. We also discussed 2 metrics that are drivers in determining the level of risk for students and staff. And they are utilization of school facilities and a proposed threshold of 75%, very similar to that of restaurants in our community. And secondly, additional reduction of existing class size ratios. The slide that you're looking at right now depicts the logic model we are following to determine the tolerance threshold of individual schools, since school plans vary in size and capacity, just on the basis of their architecture, on the basis of square footage, and the division of that individual square footage. Our current thinking, which we will be sharing with our school board next week, hinges on this backward planning from August 24th, which is the scheduled first day of school for the 2020-2021 school year. After discussing our logic model with our board, we will then begin a communications campaign with all of our stakeholders to inform them of the options that will be available to them during a phase 2 reopening of schools. And those are the options I'm going to cover in a second. Parents will be surveyed based on school-specific populations. So very soon, there will be school-specific surveys for us to have the most updated real-time data, not only specific to students currently assigned to that school, but revealing the parental options available to them. The responses will be collected through July 10th from every single parent based on school-specific surveys across all of Miami-Dade. This was a decision that we made since we currently possess district-wide survey data for our parents as well as teachers. We're rolling out additional surveys for other employee groups, but now this is much more strategic, much more specific to individual schools to calculate finally the utilization to capacity, to ratio, to social distancing, and necessary mitigation based on the options available to parents in each school. In the end, as I said at the very beginning, there will be 4 essential models. Number 1, a schoolhouse model 5 days a week that relies on an in-person educational approach. Then 2 hybrid alternating day models. And then last, the 4th model, the My School Online, which is the district's school-linked distance learning model. Let's take a closer look at these models. The first one, the traditional schoolhouse model. We can probably all agree again that our traditional school model is the one that is, again, most optimal for the student experience. And that is why, as you look at that slide, you see in terms of student experience, it ranks at the highest. It does provide, however, some degree of risk considering the local and current conditions in terms of student health issues and staff health issues, particularly if all students and families opted for this model simultaneously. This would definitely push a school well over the 50 or 75% utilization thresholds that have been established by the state for other institutions. Why should we care for our children and staffs at a lower threshold than the state has found acceptable for institutions such as salons, restaurants, and others? So for us, the number of schools that would be able to offer a traditional 5-day-a-week in-person instructional model, depending on the options exercised by families, will be determined exactly by that set of data. Personal choice by parents and students, side by side with specific school layout and utilization versus capacity, exercising the greatest level of social distancing possible. Additionally, you may remember a schoolhouse model that looked at potentially suspending elective courses in order to bring down class size. My friends, we are no longer advocating for that model, as we believe the student experience will not be a good one. Electives, art, music, programs are essential, indispensable to our children, so we have abandoned that model. It should also be noted that voluntary pre-K, Head Start, and early Head Start, as well as students with disabilities in separated setting classrooms, will come to school daily, regardless of model selected at a school, since they are self-contained and can accommodate either a low teacher-student ratio organically or through the decoupling of certified teacher and paraprofessional or aide. This is the model that most closely resembles a traditional school year. I'm not going to go through all of the mitigating circumstances that we've considered, the social distancing, the temperature measurement, the unidirectional hallways, the increased sanitization cycles, because we already covered that. I'm speaking specifically now about the models. The next two models are the hybrid models. And I actually would like Mrs. Kierda, our CAO, to cover the next two models, the hybrid model C and hybrid model D. And they vary only on the repetitive nature or the alternating cycle of students in school. Mrs. Kierda?
Good afternoon. As you noticed in our logic model, there will be schools in which students the number of students may far exceed the 75% threshold of utilization, even after parents opt for distance learning and are My School Online. So those schools, students at those schools will attend school either 2 or 3 days a week, opting for a hybrid model. You may remember that on Monday, we had 5 hybrid models. Based on our discussions and some feedback from working group members, both orally and through email, these models have been whittled down to now 2. Gone is Model A. You may remember that that model had a day in which all students participated in e-learning, while the custodial staff deep cleaned and sanitized the building. This model has been discarded because, number one, the school can be properly sanitized after students go home for the day, and 2, it removes an entire school day from the student in-person experience, further decreasing student participation in face-to-face learning. Models B and E have also been abandoned. You may remember that both of those models had the most academically fragile students reporting to school on Wednesdays, while the remaining 3/4 of the student body were home e-learning. These 2 models were eliminated as well due to the need to cohort students by ability in order to keep the cohorts intact, and the resulting segregation and possible stigma that this may cause, as well as our desire to serve more students, 50% of the student population on any given day, rather than 25% of the population. So now let's take a look at the 2 remaining hybrid models. The first is hybrid model C. Hybrid model C is an alternating e-learning in-school model with cohort A and B alternating days at the schoolhouse. The cycle of instruction would complete itself every 2 weeks, with each cohort attending a total of 5 days brick and mortar and 5 days of e-learning every 10 days. This model and the next would cut the school site utilization on any given day by 50%. Hybrid model D, you may remember, was proffered by a group of secondary principals who preferred that students complete their full schedule before heading home to e-learning if they are following a block schedule. Hence, you see cohort A coming to the schoolhouse 2 days back to back, and then participating in e-learning for 2 days after that, with cohort B following the same pattern the next 2 days. This model comes full circle in balancing the total days of instruction for both cohorts of students every 4 weeks. As depicted in our logic model shared with you earlier, parents who indicate an unwillingness to have their child report to brick and mortar in August will have several non-schoolhouse models to elect from, whether it's Florida Virtual School, Miami-Dade Online, Homeschool, other non-traditional public school options, or My School Online. My School Online is the name that we've given the school-linked distance learning model that we discussed with you on Monday. This model entails having students maintaining their enrollment status at their brick and mortar school. Students will be attending school online during regular school hours and following a standard school schedule. This is a departure from our phase 2 distance learning in the spring. Teachers will meet with students daily, utilizing web conferencing technology and delivering lessons they design using district purchase courseware. Curriculum would be provided through this courseware for consistency and equity across schools and campuses. Students return to their school campuses second semester if they so choose, provided we're in phase 3. Of course, wraparound support services will be provided to students such as counseling, any type of therapies, and mental health on campus or remotely as appropriate. And it should be noted that My School Online is not an option for voluntary pre-kindergarten or VPK program students, as well as Head Start and Early Head Start programming. We are currently working on marketing materials, the procurement of courseware, design of professional development for our educators, and a website for parents to gain more information about this MDCPS school-linked distance learning program. Enrollment for My School Online would be a semester at a time and would offer students the ability to pivot back to brick and mortar when phase 3 is announced, should they choose to do so. I'll be happy to entertain any questions you might have. If not, back to Mr. Carvalho.
All right, so before we go to the questions, and our presentation, as I said, is over. After the introductions, we spent about a half hour, maybe a little bit longer, presenting a comprehensive set of options and decision points, as well as timelines. I hope you recognize that what we have provided here reflects, number one, guidelines from CDC, local state health departments, international best practices, particularly from districts that have returned students to schools. Reflects also some of the specific guidelines provided by the state of Florida. It relies on some of your direct input thus far, and it reflects, for me, critically important, the survey data results, where parents asked for 3 things. Number one, a percentage of parents, because of a number of personal, professional circumstances or personal belief, wanted a return to a traditional model of schooling with all of the preventive measures to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of staff and students alike. A sizable percentage of parents, about 30%, declared a clear interest in a distance learning process, one that will be similar to what we experienced in the last quarter, with significant enhancements that will be clearly discussed, negotiated with our partners through collective bargaining processes to ensure that the needs of the students are addressed, but also the professional respect and flexibility that's owed to our professionals is observed. And then there was an close to equal percentage of parents who felt that they needed a hybrid model that reflected both, based on availability, some degree of presence in school, but also some protective presence at home. These 4 models that we are presenting today provide for the demand, the wish of the parents, wrapped around within the guardrails of what's appropriate, what's recommended, what's safe, what's practicable, what's implementable, and what's fundable, with certain flexibility afforded to us from Tallahassee. So with that said, let me once again thank every single member of this group, and let's start the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Carvalho. We're going to now start taking your questions. Ask that you please raise your hands through the application here. I see first question from Ms. Mercy Lopez. Ms. Lopez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torrance, Mr. Carvalho. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to serve on this board. It's been a very great experience, and I thank you all for participating. My question is for Mrs. Izquierdo. Mrs. Izquierdo, based on the My School Online, are we providing a full day including electives, or is there something that this will be only core courses? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Our plan right now is a full complement of courses. We're in negotiations with the software provider to make that happen for our students, but that is our intention.
Name is Carl Niccolo. I have a 1:30. Okay. Tell me to just roll right in.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Mr. Bob Martinez. Bob?
Sure, thanks, Jim. Couple questions. The health measures that you mentioned that would be implemented at the schools are very good, but how are you going to ensure compliance? Good intentions at first, people are going to get, they're going to do it, but you know how human nature is, they'll get complacent. We have a lot that we asked our teachers to do. I'm sure they're going to want to enforce some of those in their own classroom. But Jim, how are we going to monitor compliance with all these measures in each classroom, in each school throughout the district? That's a big undertaking. And my next question, if I can just throw it in there, if we're eliminating electives, which is great to hear, Marie, how do we reduce the class sizes in the school option, the attendance in school option?
Hi, Bob. Thank you for the question. The reason we abandoned that model was because it's clearly not in the best interest of students, for students to come to school and not have elective courses. I mean, that's the reason I went to school when I was in elementary, and certainly a lot of our students love and benefit from those classes. And so that's the first reason. The second reason is it's less than ideal to have a non-certified teacher. It's a certified teacher nonetheless, but a non-certified teacher delivering that instruction. That was a strategy that we had proposed early on, utilizing in order to then lower the class sizes. But we feel that when we look at it through a risk-benefit analysis, it's just really not worth there's not enough benefit. And so that model has been eliminated because of that. Now, I will point you back to the logic model. The slide that had the logic models kind of looks like a decision tree, because it really relies on the individual school, the current utilization level at that school, and the amount of children at that school whose families opt for a non-schoolhouse option. So those are all variables. And depending on those variables, then schools will be able to offer or not, based on the threshold that we've established that we feel comfortable as a working group as tolerable in terms of keeping our children and our employees safe. So that's the reason why we removed that option. We can't really support it on the academic side. It was kind of a low-hanging fruit strategy to lower class size, but we just don't think that it's worth the effort.
Yeah, to the second question, Bob, that you asked, I'll tee it up, and then if Jim wants to jump in or somebody else. Look, number one, there are protocols for training for administrators, supervisors, teachers, students, and parents themselves. So when earlier on I talked about, and this was something that Dr. Judy Schechter actually wrote to me about, is one of the most powerful tools we have is to actually educate in terms of behaviors. So inspection of expected behavior and protocols important with checklists. They are being developed as we speak. When I talk about mandatory washing cycles or sanitization cycles of bathrooms, expect to see what you see at airports with a little checklist with a signature each time that it is visited and cleaned. But yes, you will be constantly expecting the practice based on the protocols, training, and education of expected behaviors prior to the very first day of school. And the training protocols for our professionals at all levels, from administrators to our teachers, to our support staff, webinars for parents for an echo of behavioral expectation to take place at home in partnership with the PTA, PTSA, and the Parent Academy. But yes, there will be a clear daily, hourly examination and inspection of the protocols we're putting into place. There's no other way of doing it, but we really hope that the training up front will go a long way. The education on expected conduct and behaviors will go a long way. The only thing I will add also to the question that Marie answered is that, right now we possess that the survey data from parents, where I said virtually 30%, 30%, maybe the highest, 37% wanted a in-school option. The others, a little bit less, around 30% or so. So we know district-wide, based on current conditions. And that's why we're going to test this again. Naturally, organically, we will have the ability, the flexibility to reach that ideal 75% threshold. In cases where there may be some outlying schools, that's why we need that school-specific survey. Then we need to employ additional strategies. That is where we may need to go into common areas and transform them into classroom space, whether we're talking about auditoria, media centers, or other larger areas, and transform them into a classroom space. But we will only know that when we obtain the school-specific parent survey, where the parents, as I said, through July 11th, I believe, will declare their choice. I think the next hand that we had skipped is, are you okay with that, Bob?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had called on Adriana, and I think Ms. Jimenez, you're now on.
Yes, thank you very much. And I applaud your decision for the requirement of the pay scoring. I have questions about that because I work in the healthcare and I see my job is train people about how to use PPE. So what are your plans for training the students and the parents and the staff about what type of mask selecting, how to use it, how properly maintain, all those things that when you see on the street, people are not properly wearing the PPE. They're plans for education.
Right. So, Ms. Jimenez, thank you so much. We actually have spent quite a bit of time, particularly under Ms. Brown's leadership, really discussing some of those elements. So not only the proper use, the proper positioning, wearing of PPEs, the when and how, by whom, under what circumstances. And much like I responded to Bob, expect over the next few weeks, part of that marketing plan that was discussed, for parents not only to receive information about the models, but also, to Dr. Schachter's initial point, the education regarding expected behaviors. And part of that education includes the appropriate wearing of personal protective equipment, how to really wear a face mask, what type of mask or face covering is appropriate, what kind isn't, the appropriate positioning, that's not just mouth as we often see, it's mouth and nose. So all of that will take place with students, with parents, and obviously workforce. And I see that Ms. Carla Matz and Mindy are demonstrating the appropriate wearing a face covering right now. Since we're on the subject of personal protective equipment, it is clear to us, particularly after the multiple municipal announcements in our community by the mayors of a number of cities, that any one person, a public space, needs to be wearing a face covering. Obviously, because of the significant exponential increase in positive cases in Miami-Dade. We believe that by the time school reopens, most individuals will actually have their own personalized ones. We're working with uniform companies to actually make that as part of the school uniform. Personalizing it with school logos to a certain extent, making it more appealing for the students to wear. But I want to commit to something, and I've said this before, even though we believe that most staff members, most students will actually have their own, most parents, we have acquired, continue to acquire sufficient stock of this equipment to provide to any one person who may show up at our schools without one. And that is something that we have a commitment to doing. With that said, for the ones who use reusable ones, we'll be providing guidance also on the care, how often to clean it, when to dispose of it. Because I've seen, particularly in our community feeding distribution sites, a lot of people are wearing masks, but you can tell they've been wearing the same mask probably for 3 weeks. And it's probably more harmful to them at this point than not wearing one. So yes, we'll be doing quite a bit of work regarding sensitization, education, protocols on utilization of PPEs, but also letting individuals know, even though they have a choice to bring their own, should anyone arrive at our schoolhouse without one, that we are going to be pretty insistent on them wearing one that we'll provide to them. I think next up is, was that okay, Ms. Jimenez? Thank you. Ms. Carla Hernandez-Metz.
All right, I'm taking my mask off, but Mindy's pushing back. So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to commend everybody on this committee. I think that the work that you all have done has been quite a heavy lift, and I am really impressed by the expertise and obviously the amount of feedback and the structure that we're putting into the thought of how we move forward. I have 3 questions. I'm going to ask them all so you can answer them for me. Number 1 is with regarding temperature checks. We know that, you know, we don't have to do them, but we know that there are some teachers that are extra careful. So this might be like a Ron Steiger question, but I'm going to ask all my questions at once. If a teacher wants to do temperature checks for their children, for her students or their students in the classroom, is that something that maybe teachers can purchase through the teacher lead money, the government, the state funding that we get to buy school supplies? So that's one question. The second question is, if a child is symptomatic and they're put in isolation, who is watching it? Is it a nurse that's going to be watching those children? And then my third question is, oh, yes, safety. We're still on safety. Regarding fire drills, we know that there are certain things that we have to legally make sure that we are abiding and making sure that our, you know, all systems are in place. If we have a fire drill, a safety drill, how are we going to make sure that we conduct those things in as safe of an environment that we could possibly do that in? So those are my questions. Whoever wants to take them.
Right, I will actually take all 3. Number 1, actually more important, and you asked, 2 of the questions you asked are issues that we are working through. Some have some legal ramifications. For example, number 1, I don't believe that there are any restrictions in terms of the fund utilization that teachers have access to should they want to purchase one of these high-end temperature readers. The question, this is something that we're contemplated and we are working through. As we said, we're not going to mandate temperature gauging at the entrance schools or buses. And by the way, this was something that I initially advocated for because the initial guidance so promoted it. But after reading additional literature, the evolution of information, and quite frankly, I keep referring to the medical experts in speaking with Dr. Murthy, speaking with Dr. Schachter, reading the documents, not a wise course of action. So we are examining 2 elements. Number 1, not just the purchase, which I think there is no restriction, but actually potential legal implications of randomly deciding to check temperature of X number of students just because of the classroom they enter. That's something that is being considered. If there are no obvious conditions to be concerned. On the other hand, and I understand your point, Carla, what we really continue to pursue, and this will be additional survey of staff, is underlying staff conditions that we need to be aware of and the protective measures we must take with that specific individual. So when I mentioned, for example, an acrylic partition, see-through to allow the visual engagement, the social emotional connection, that's something that we are analyzing, and the data from school-specific staff surveys will provide additional information. During the isolation of a student, which there are two sites, obviously the natural one is a clinic, but each school will have two sites for isolation, because you may have a child who's dealing with some medical condition that has nothing to do, nothing to do with a possible COVID-19 infection. So minimally 2 isolation sites. The one that would be reserved for a potential COVID case, temperature, what have you, will be staffed by a medical professional, a nurse. And we're actually in conversations with a number of our partner organizations to ensure that the appropriate staffing is there for that. And the last question, yes, fire drills and other types of mandatory drills now in the books in the state of Florida. And I'd like to defer to Mr. Torrance or Ms. Brown or Chief Lopez, or all three.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. I'll start and then maybe get some input from the others, but absolutely. And this was one of the things we discussed at the initial presentation with you, that this is something of significant concern to us, because we do have to conduct the fire drills, which are 10 a year. Then we have the other safety drill, active shooter and such. Clearly the protocols will have to be updated for this to make sure that whenever students and adults are in a more confined configuration, that they are wearing face covering. And this is part of the rationale for everyone having a face covering coming into the school in the morning, having it available to them should they need it, wear it in those scenarios where they will be closer and they are not conducive to social distancing. But typically our drills are well organized. Our teachers do a fantastic job, guiding their children through the drills. And we don't see anything different. It'll just be additional professional development, additional training. Do we have all the answers today? No. Will we have the answers by opening of schools? We will. We need to, and we will. So I don't know, Chief, if there's anything you'd like to add, or Ms. Brown?
No, what you alluded to, Mr. Torrance, is absolutely correct. We are in constant communication with the Department of Education and the Office of Safe Schools in Tallahassee to ensure that any changes made to the law before the start of the school year, we will be able to have sufficient time to make any adaptations. Those conversations are ongoing, and as of now, there are no major changes impacting us directly at this time.
And actually the decision, and Superintendent touched on it early, the decision or part of the weight of our decision on the temperature checks has to do specifically with a single point of entry and making sure that we don't have students congregating in large numbers outside the schoolhouse door waiting to enter the building. So the balance that we're...
Make no mistake about it. I mean, some we have already resolved, some we have not. Some, quite frankly, we are seeking additional guidance from other entities, collaborative agencies, because considering what we know from a health perspective, some of the current requirements that deal with safety and security post-Parkland are at odds with one another. So as we spoke last time, the concept of safe corner is an important concept. Let's just understand that in safe corners, you naturally have all the students and staff concentrated in the same little area. That's the protective step. Obviously, face coverings would be a must at that point, regardless of what the social distancing in a classroom prior to the emergency would be. Obviously, in the case of any one of these drills, the wearing of masks, of facial coverings will be a must. Remember, if the students are not in the classroom, if they are transitioning between classrooms or entering the building, they're wearing masks. If they have to exit the classroom for the purpose of a drill, they'll be wearing masks. That is the natural training element that will be in place. I think next speaker Was that okay, Ms. Hernandez-Metz?
Yeah, let me just do one last comment, because I'm not sure if I can even phrase this as a question, but I want this to be something that's thought of. I know that there's focus on contract tracing. Thank you for, the diagram. How do we, and this is a question that might not be able to get answered, but definitely want us to think about this. What are we going to do, just precautions in terms of children or people in general that might be asymptomatic? Like, how are we going to trace that? And, what kind of precautions can we take for asymptomatic folks?
Yeah, I'm going to rely on, this is the beauty of having not just one, but virtually everybody that I'm looking at now being smarter than I am, which allows me to bounce that question to the next speaker, who's Dr. Judy Schachter. So I'm sure Dr. Schachter actually has some opinion on this matter, but you have also a question or a comment.
Thank you. Allow me just a moment, Ms. Hernandez, to first say how impressed I am with the process and the plan that have come up. I want to congratulate the superintendent, the board, and the entire team. I'm grateful and I'm honored to be in this community, because what's gone into this, it has been done so rapidly in this context, but also carefully, very inclusively. You kept your promise to make sure you took a lot of input from everybody, and as science-based as is possible in this changing landscape. And you've come up with something that I think we can all get behind and feel really good about. So I really want to congratulate you. And you've said this, we'll have to change as we move forward, because new information comes at us every single day. What our situation is around the virus changes every single day. I'm sure you'll mark the plan, whether it's with a watermark or a fine print of this is subject to change, so that people know it's not written in stone. The American Academy of Pediatrics, and I'm in touch with their leadership regularly, have been asking them for guidelines to help this process. Released that only today. And I took a quick look at it before this meeting. We're on target. Without having that ahead of time, we're very much aligned with what they're trying to ask us to do. And so good for the folks on this. And the hard stuff, as hard as this has been, it's going to get harder to implement. And as you laid out, we really will have to, I don't like to call it enforcement, Bob. I'd rather say that this is a culture change, and constantly we're going to have to help ourselves and each other to keep ourselves healthy and remind ourselves as we start to slip to make that happen. Ms. Hernandez, in terms of asymptomatic, we have to trust that everyone around us potentially has coronavirus, that we're doing this call via Zoom or whatever platform we're using because we may have coronavirus. Most people will be asymptomatic with it. Children, we know, and in the AAP guidelines, it reminds us that children, unlike influenza, are less likely to be the vectors. They're less likely to pass it on to other people. They're less likely to be infected, and they're less likely to be sick. Thank God. As a pediatrician, I'm so happy about that. Everybody in the school should be happy about that. But they can still pass it to other people. So can everybody else on staff. Most people will not show symptoms. Many people can be what the WHO official was trying to communicate, might be pre-symptomatic, highly infectious, not having symptoms. And we have to treat them that way, which is the entire reason that we do what I will continue to call physical distancing rather than social distancing. And that means we keep our 6 feet. We know that droplets are more often spread 3 feet, but we do the 6 feet just in case. It's a nice compromise for aerosols. And we use the masks. The superintendent's correct. It doesn't work well if you leave it around your neck. but we use it around our mouths and our noses so we don't spread those droplets, and we keep the 6 feet so we don't contaminate each other, and we wash our hands. We're finding more and more that the other kinds of contact, the walls, the desks, can spread it, but less likely. So that's why we have to do all of that. If you'll allow me, I have one, I think I addressed that. I have one question that I don't think we've put in there. I may have sent it in one of my emails, but it's sort of a question and a plea. I'd really like to see, for the sake of the school system and our community, a very strong push this year. I'd like to say, as far as requiring, though I know that's a far reach, immunizations for flu vaccine, influenza. The influenza looks exactly like coronavirus. When we get into flu season, which will come very quickly, it will flood our healthcare system. It will send people home sick. It will scare everybody. And the best prevention we have is the flu vaccine. And I want to say this here because I know we also have folks that are representing the unions and all our employees. I know the school system has been great about trying to make sure we have free vaccine available to our district, to all the employees and to the students. And I know you're looking for vendors to help with that again. Please get behind this. If you can require it, fantastic. If it's just a big campaign and an effort, let's all get behind this because it'll save our hospitals, our healthcare systems. There's a good reason to do it in terms of preventing flu, period. It does run through children and back home to the adults, but it will reduce what we are afraid of from coronavirus as well. And then finally, a shout out to our comprehensive school health program, who I know will help implement everything we're doing on both of these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. So some quick feedback. So Dr. Schechter, 100%, you have our commitment. In fact, Ms. Daisy Gonzalez-Diego, Ms. Valentina Brown, they are primary partners in aggressive marketing campaign to immunize not only our children, our students, their parents, and our workforce. We have made it very easy over the years. We are actually contemplating mobile units, which we've done in the past, to come to schools, particularly areas where there's a scarcity of local clinics that where they may get the immunization, even though you can get it at many cases, a drugstore. But yes, you will see that not beginning next month, within days, a massive campaign to do so. Secondly, I guess I should add at this point, because I meant to touch on it and I didn't. You know, we didn't talk about, because today we really wanted to focus on the models, but and contact tracing. But look, sports, extracurricular activities. We're working through models and really doing a lot of research. We will have music programs, even though we know that chorus is will be one of the most dangerous classes in school when we reopen, because of the forceful, and I think this was a point that Dr. Marty made last time. Actually, I believe the greatest single count of exposure and contagion in this country took place in the Northwest state as a result of, I believe, 60 plus individuals all participating in a choral activity. And there was a huge rate of infection. So we are finding artful safeguards to be able to do that. It is possible. It is costly, but it is possible. But we are committed. As Mrs. Izquierdo said, you know, schools without electives, it's half a school. And we cannot stifle that. Sports, the same thing. Look, there are ways of conducting practice and training by reducing or assigning equipment that's used by one student to only one student, and the appropriate isolation, and shifting what used to be done indoors, outdoors. So, consider that as a possibility. I know there are a lot of questions of our teams. Look, we are highest performing academic district in urban America, but we also know that we have quite a bit of athletic prowess, and expect the earlier part of July, actually by as early as next week maybe, for us to provide guidance on a moderate and careful resuming of training for a number of our sports. We saw all along that track, okay, not so bad. Swimming, maybe not so bad. Tennis, ideal. Football, soccer, wrestling, which I was a high school wrestler, not so easy to do with any level of social distancing. But we are working with partner organizations. We'll be making an announcement about, as I said, the progressive and careful resumption of those types of activities. So that's it for now. Dr. Lisa Gwynn. Thank you, Dr. Schechter, for always your solid perspectives. Thank you so much.
Dr. Schechter is always a tough act to follow. So just quickly, she had mentioned about the flu vaccine. We at the Florida chapter, the Academy of Pediatrics, we are going to be putting this on our legislative agenda for this upcoming session. To have mandated vaccines is kind of an uphill battle, and if we can engage our school districts, government affairs folks when we have this push in Tallahassee, it would be wonderful. It will not, help us with this flu season, but definitely in the future. This is something, as I said, we're working on from an advocacy perspective. I just would like to take the opportunity to drill down to some specific concerns that I have related to school health, in terms of what our nurses are up against and our clinics are up against, being the medical director of school health and managing these clinics and operationalizing protocols and so forth. I think, even the AAP guidelines that just came out today, they aren't super specific with how we manage sick children and when they can come back to school and those decision trees. There's been a lot of talk across the country with pediatricians that are involved in school health, and there has not been a set of guidelines, and everyone's kind of, leaving it to local health departments and districts. So I would just like to propose that we begin those discussions and make those decisions in the near future. And I say that because not just because of all of the agencies that are managing Health Connect clinics, but also for those schools that may not have nurses, training of staff, training of existing nurses. It's going to be a whole different ballgame in terms of how we manage these sick kids and when they can come back to school, and how the school nurses are going to play a role in this. And lastly, I just want to mention that if we have these hybrid models and there are less students in the schools, there may not be a need, with our current model within Health Connect, we have, full-time nurses in many of these schools. And with the drop in the volume of students, it may be necessary for us to kind of revisit our model in terms of what the needs are in each school now that there's less students, and perhaps we can explore having more schools covered by nurses with these hybrid models. So I just kind of wanted to throw all of those things out there. Obviously, this meeting will not cover all of that, but perhaps we can create another work group working with the Department of Health to come up, and also to engage the Children's Trust, and specifically how we're going to handle these issues in the school clinics themselves, and so that we can ensure that we have proper training and protocols in place when we start our developmental professional training of the nurses in the first part of August.
Great comment. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. So you're absolutely right. In as much as everybody's a trained professional, obviously, if you're a nurse, you are a trained professional. I think enough has changed for us to revisit the protocols, particularly during a time of shifting conditions, right? And shifting demographics and shifting utilization in schools. So I think the time is right. I was actually going to propose exactly where you ended up, which is a very focused strategic working group to address the additional training protocols, or perhaps the redeployment of resources based on need in one area versus another, based on demographic shifts, as a function of parental options that will be made. I know Ms. Brown may want to say something else about
Before
this.
you go on, I'd just also like to say, Dr. Gwen, you're on point. We have already reached out to the Children's Trust specifically about the flexibility on that, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Brown if there's anything.
And also just working with the, with operations and Mr. Zare and Ms. Wilder and their team, we have to collaboratively work together. And the other thing I forgot to mention is the immunization levels. This is another area that I'm extremely concerned about with compliance with immunizations, and how can our school nurses work on that issue as well. I mean, there's a lot going on, and I think that we really need to be having those discussions in the very, very near future.
Valentina?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gwen, for all of your support and your support with our program. I agree. I think, like the superintendent said, we need to have a small working group, and I will reach out to you right after this meeting so we can begin those conversations. Looking at the redeployment of our nurses, looking at the services we provide, and I think we talked about health techs in the schools as well. So I welcome that, and maybe we can do the training of our nurses much earlier this year so that they'll be able to provide us with the information we need to our school site administrators.
Yeah, and if I may, you made one additional point. I just want to give some quick feedback before we go to Dr. Linda Brown, specific to advocacy in Tallahassee. And after Dr. Brown, we're going to go to Miss Eileen Siegel. Iraida Mendes-Cartaya, our Associate Superintendent in charge of advocacy in Tallahassee, is on the line, as are a number of school board members. And I think that this is the point that you made regarding additional efforts at the legislative level to ensure a broader scale guarantee of immunization and flu shots for any person who enters schools. That's an idea whose time has come, and Ms. Mendes-Cartaya is listening. She will take the appropriate action, but certainly our policymakers, our school board members who are as attendees right now, there's local action that we can also take. With that said, Dr. Linda Brown, let me just thank you, because I did read with interest the email you sent regarding the efficacy of masks.
Yes.
Like everything else, a mask is not necessarily a mask, even though it may look like a mask in terms of its protective nature and its rating, right?
Exactly.
So we are part of our protocols, as I said, when I said it's not just what you wear, how you wear it, but what you wear and how often, and how are you caring for it. So thank you very much for that perspective that you brought to us.
And thank you, sir. And I want to also commend this group, for such a robust operation and delivery. I feel safe around you, and I'm sure our parents and staff will also feel the same way. However, I do have a question, and one of my questions is relating to the medically fragile children and special needs children and the staff that's caring for them, i.e. tracheotomy kids, wheelchair, those that may have CP, and those that tend to have increased secretions. I wanted to know what plans are in place for that particular group. And let me just do the backdrop. And I want to thank again, that was Dr. Gwen, because I also, part of my background was with education psychology at University of Miami, where I trained with special needs children. And as a nurse practitioner, I have also worked with the school system and worked with these medically fragile children. So how are we addressing that? And the fact that I heard from Dr. Gwen that she works with the nurses. So that training, again, is going to be important, and what you need to increase versus decreasing the number of nurses that's working with your medically fragile group. And particularly, that's my question and concern.
Thank you very much. This is Missy Izquierdo, and we're lucky to have with us Dr. Magali Abrahante, who supervises our exceptional student education program. Maggie, are you with us? I've asked, I think she's an attendee. I was told that she had been moved up to panelist. So maybe we can have Mr. Carvalho address that, and then hopefully someone can bring Maggie in.
Yes, well, until she gets on, let me just simply say, actually, the point made by Dr. Gwynn earlier is part of the answer. We recognize that, and I'll say this very honestly, it was so visible to me when we shut down schools that the students who were most fragile, physically fragile, students with disabilities, food insecure children, had the most to lose. And quite frankly, in many instances, under the right circumstances, the resuming of school is good for them. And, but expect, as Dr. Gwynn said, new, much more forceful protocols, training protocols, district provided specialized PPE that precisely for the type of child that you describe with additional secretions, et cetera, or respiratory issues where the professional who cares for this child will face a greater level of exposure. We as a district will be providing specialized PPE similar to what you see often on TV at the hospital. These individuals will need it. There's no other way of safeguarding our staff while simultaneously caring for the child. But if Dr. Abrahante is on, please address beyond that.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. We have been doing a lot of research in the last few weeks to prepare for the reopening of school with our most fragile students. And one of the key pieces that we will be working with is our contracted nurses that already provide services for these students and making sure that they have received the appropriate training to be able to adapt to the new normal. And so that is a big piece of what we're going to be dealing with to prepare for this, as well as potentially looking at the class size. Even in those small classes, we may have to reduce even further in order to make sure that we are providing the support necessary for our most fragile students.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Brown, I really want maybe as a side chat virtually, because we keep getting, obviously, if I were to count the number of emails I get from private sector vendors who have the latest, greatest, best mask in the world, all made in the same country, in the same factory, but it's the best. So I really need some additional conversation. We've done our research. But the level of efficacy and filtration of particles, whether it's 99, 95%, or down to
68, 28, yeah.
Yeah, some that are being sold, and I've looked at them, and if you stretch them, you can see it's just gauze. Absolutely. It looks pretty, but I don't think it offers much protection. So we're going to be working with some of you in actually, as we continue to acquire a PPE, to guarantee that there is a minimum set of critical elements that we consider and accept.
Wonderful.
And that's something that, quite frankly, the private sector is flooding us with the latest, greatest, and not everything is great in that domain. So I'll be having additional conversations with you regarding this topic.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Jocelyn Lawrence. I'm sorry, Miss Eileen Siegel. Next, I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay, Superintendent. First of all, I want to thank you all, because after the last Zoom call, as a parent, grandparent, I was extremely nervous and upset. After listening today, I feel a lot calmer. And that goes back to two questions. Will you have hotlines in 3 languages? Because you mentioned webinar to teach parents and get parents educated on what to expect in the school, or any kind of questions, because I think that would help a lot of parents. Some do not know how to work the computer or Zoom calls to get educated. So we have to look at making our parents feel as comfortable as possible. So that's one. The other question I also have, and it was just sent to me, because of what's going on the news today of the increase in the virus all over South Florida, especially Miami-Dade being the epicenter, is there any concerns? As parents, we're scared. We are scared to put our children in this back into the system. So is it through the pediatricians and Dr. Marty? Is it going to be safe? Will they be in an environment that will be the best for them? Or should we be looking at delaying the opening of school? Because you were mentioning phases, and I am not a doctor. I'm not a health expert. I'm just a parent. So we have to think on our level. We don't know. So we're asking you that question. And
Yeah.
Go ahead. Thank you.
First, nós vamos tu información en tu langue. Vamos a tener toda la información en todos los idiomas. That's in Haitian Creole and Spanish.
Right.
I think you were expecting everything we do is with a cultural and linguistic sensitivity appropriate for our community. And we know, I keep saying this, we know who stands to lose the most, whether it's educational opportunity, access to healthcare, access to food security through our schools.
Right.
So expect our outreach, our training components to be in the languages that are most frequently spoken here in our community, at the very least, Spanish and Haitian Creole. Secondly, the second question you asked is an important one, and I will answer it up to a certain point.
Okay.
Because I think one of the things that we've recognized, and this is part of some of the communication that I've had individually with many of you, is the uncertainty of tomorrow. We know right now what the trend is, right? Some are referring to it as exponential in nature. And that is number of cases. And then there's another trend, which is hospitalizations. And then there's another trend, which is deaths, right? There is so much. And with all the information that's out there, you yourselves have taught me that there's still so much to be learned, not about the data, but about the virus itself, how it is contracted. Each day it seems, or each week seems that there's one additional type of person that is more susceptible to the virus than others, right? So your question is a difficult question to answer. We believe, and this goes to the point that Bob Martinez made earlier, we believe on the basis of the choices offered, which afford opportunities for those individuals who have compromised immune systems, who have a fragility of health conditions, to opt into environments or options that are protective. For the students' parents who will be in our schoolhouse option, we believe that the precautions we're taking, the safety measures we're taking, the training that do provide the layer of security that is appropriate based on the latest guidance from all of the agencies that we are listening to, including the American Pediatric Association. So with that said, I would be lying to you if I said that, society as we know it today, and beaches as we know them today, and schooling as it will be in August with all these precautions is totally 100% devoid of risk.
Yeah.
That's why we've been very honest in putting up the models. And you remember last meeting when we were considering 7 different models?
Mhm.
On the upper left-hand corner, and even the 4 models that you saw today, there is a clear disclosure of the benefit, educational benefit, side by side with risk associated with that type of model. And we even included the ability that as a system, as circumstances change, based on that model, our ability to pivot quickly to a different model on a basis of phase or actual circumstances. So that's the most honest way I can answer the question at this time, Eileen.
Thank you, though. Appreciate
You're welcome. We're going to go now to Dr. Eileen Marty, and then to Adriana Jimenez, and then following that, Miss Mercy Lopez. I know Adriana Santa was up first, but affording first an opportunity for somebody who's not spoken, and when Dr. Marty raises her hand, my hand goes down and my ears perk up. So.
Well, thank you so much, Superintendent Carvalho. You've done a phenomenal job. Your team is outstanding. There are still quite a number of sections of the plan that need to be more carefully looked at. Bathrooms in particular come to mind. There's, and also when we talked about the individuals that have increased risk, you mentioned just now something very important is that we're seeing shifts in who we should consider high risk. And among children, one of the things we weren't thinking about in our plan is what we're seeing now in our hospitals. And those are children that are overweight. Obesity is a huge factor, and we have to start considering that as an important way of how we structure our classrooms and everything else to reduce their risk. And the other thing I wanted to address was the question by Ms. Hernandez a while ago that Dr. Judy did address to some extent, but I just wanted to say very specifically that all of the things that we're doing are geared specifically towards addressing that asymptomatic component and pre-symptomatic component of the population. That's why we're wearing masks. That's why we're doing hygiene, et cetera, et cetera. Because if we knew who was infected, everything would, if people weren't shedding before they are symptomatic, the picture would be very, very different.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's, one of the points that you made, Dr. Marty, and which was made before as well, and I made it myself, is that each day, it seems, or each week, we learn a new dimension. And with that new dimension is another risk factor or a type of individual who is more susceptible. So what we continue to do is not to pivot, but to add to our box of knowledge, right? Additional conditions to look out for. And it's not easy, because as I said, the rate and source of information sometimes is confusing. It's dizzying. That's why we keep going back to the most reliable sources, primary sources that come from institutions, associations that we trust. Your point on bathrooms is a very good one. So I addressed it lightly up front, and I talked about just the personal protection behavior that is expected and the constant monitoring and the sanitization cycles, but we are considering additional elements. They will vary from school to school because bathroom design is different often from school to school and extremely different. Like, we don't have many concerns at the elementary level, because at the primary level, because K, first grade and pre-K, the bathrooms are built into the classroom. At the middle and senior high level, greater level of concern. But that's where we have the greatest chance of actually educating towards optimum behavior rather than the little ones, even though we're going to do it as well there. But I know you want to say something else.
Well, I mean, about the bathrooms, one of the things we're doing at FIU is one of our decisions is to put lids on all the toilets and to educate everyone to close the lid before they flush, which is going to reduce the aerosolization. And that's something that should be considered for the public schools as well.
I'm not sure if that's been considered, but you just sold me. I mean, again, I know that solid or liquid particulates are ejected as far as 7 to 8 feet with each flush. So more of a bit of information that's always stuck with me, but that is a very good point. So Jim, I really would like a report by week's end. Well, this is Friday, by tonight, because I think that is a very strong consideration. Thank you.
One last thing, if I may address Eileen's question too, just a little bit. We are right now have a percent positive. You didn't mention percent positive among all the different things. We're right now at 18%. And we didn't want to do reopenings if we were above 10. That was the original plan, and the real desire was to be below 5% in terms of percent positive. We're at 18. That's extremely alarming. And so we do have to be very, very cautious in exactly which way we reopen, when we reopen.
So all hands seem to be down, but I had called on, I know we're going to go to Mercy, right? And Ms. Jimenez.
All right, thank you, Superintendent. My question is for Dr. Schatzer, and then back to you, Superintendent, bouncing it back. You mentioned, Doctor, that walls and desks are not places where there will be high for contamination. My question is, based on the fact that we are not having mandatory masks inside the classroom, what is the risk of contamination when students are sharing textbooks from period to period? And what are we considering as far as textbooks? I'm looking more at the high school and clearly middle school, where there's only one set of texts for all teachers.
I can answer that question.
Ken, there is risk of contagion from physical contact with surfaces, but we are learning that it's less than we thought it was over time. Early on, we knew that it was different based on which surface that is. Steel more than some others, et cetera, et cetera. We also know we can clean those things relatively easily. Diluted vinegar, diluted bleach, et cetera, can clean those surfaces. So the droplets, the respiratory contact, bodily fluids are far more contagious than the surfaces. That's what I meant to convey. I don't think there has been any study, there's no study that I know of to say how likely it is to pass that from book to book. I would imagine, in this call alone, as well as the others, almost every scenario we come up with, the superintendent either has already thought through a scenario with his team or is still working on it. So I'm going to punt to him in terms of whether they already plan to not share books, which a lot of areas have suggested we don't share books and supplies, or if they're working on that.
Yeah, actually, Mercy, I know our CAO, Mrs. Izquierdo, is about to speak, because that was the focal point of part of our conversation, a concern, obviously, that cannot be discounted. So Marie.
Thank you, Dr. Schichter, for affirming that. We have read some of those studies and we are aware of that. However, in an abundance of caution, we will be asking our teachers to limit the sharing of materials, particularly textbooks in the classrooms. With the little children, they do typically share manipulatives. A lot of learning happens with your hands. And so we will be looking at each of those different scenarios, developing teachers through professional development as to what the proper protocols are in terms of cleaning, if they're in fact utilizing anything that might be shared or that has to absolutely be shared. But to the extent possible, we are asking teachers not to be sharing materials until the cleaning has occurred, the deep cleaning in their classrooms has occurred. We don't envision utilizing some of and nowadays, if you visit an MDCPS classroom, we have about 3 to 4, if not more, computers in the back of the room that typically students rotate through. We will not be doing those rotations. Those machines will not be accessible to students. In fact, to the extent possible, it might give us even more space in the classroom to further socially isolate, socially distance children. And of course, all of the textbooks that we have currently adopted in Miami-Dade, they all have digital versions of themselves. So the teachers will be utilizing the digital textbook in using the Promethean board. We're very lucky that we have interactive whiteboards in every class so that he or she can display the text. And then the students will use the materials that are singularly used by them. And then of course, during e-learning, the students will be using their materials at home, as well as digital content and digital materials that they will have laptops for that are distributed and accessible to them.
Yeah, the only thing I will add, and that's a terrific question, again, we didn't plan for this, but we benefited. So when we, before the closure of schools, when we announced that we had up to $200,000 devices, 200,000 devices to put in the hands of students, we ended up distributing close to 120,000. we made a wise decision, which was not to bring those devices back to us for two reasons. Number one, keep the portal open and keep the opportunity for learning for the students throughout the summer. Secondly, we knew we were going to have 2 summer sessions. Thirdly, if we were to bring those devices back, now we would have to have a plan for the disinfection, sanitization of the devices that we just brought back into the schoolhouse and now perhaps distribute to a different student. It did not make sense. So as Marie said, based on our survey and the distribution and the fact that the students have these devices and there is a digital version of the textbooks, now we can actually start this coming school year with either district provided or student brought from home, their own device, with no cross-contamination because it is the device that they have, relying a lot less on the traditional textbook. So that's part of our response to this issue. We did not envision when we launched digital convergence back in 2012-13 that it would play a huge pivotal role in terms of addressing a health risk via cross-contamination of some educational materials, whether it's computers or traditional textbooks. And I think we now go to Ms. Jimenez.
Thank you. My question is going back to the screening question, and this is basically taking into account that fever basically is just one of the many symptoms. There is any plans or any thoughts about screening the caretakers or those fragile students more frequently? It might be via a self-screening questionnaire or something for symptoms related to the disease, especially those that that are more contact with those students that might be transmitting it to them.
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question. If I heard it correctly, and I apologize, it's will we be exercising a stricter additional opportunities for screening of caretakers of fragile children?
Yes, basically those that are taking care of those fragile students that are at higher risk for developing worse outcomes if they get the disease. Like for example, right now there is some the healthcare workers that work in nursing homes. They've been screening bi-weekly, so something similar. But I know temperature is just one of the symptoms, so maybe thinking on a screening questionnaire that can be delivered. I don't know, maybe the app or something for those that take care of those more fragile students.
So when you use caretaker, you're not talking about the caretaker at home, right? You're speaking about the professional at school.
Correct. Yes.
Understood. Well, so one of the things that I said, and Dr. Abrahante also added to, is so the level of training, the protocols, and the personal protective equipment of those individuals who deal with very fragile children are going to be like nothing we've seen in a school before, because it is now an existential, indispensable requirement, we believe. We were one of the very first entities. Before there was the availability of free testing, we were, I believe, actually the very first entity that said, for our employees, free testing for everybody. It is our moral imperative, and we announced it. That will continue to be the case. And I certainly would love to hear from medical experts here if that is a recommended practice, assuming I think it logically is, if there's greater risk associated with the population you serve or your professional area, it's not only equipment, but it's also more periodic testing, and that's something that we are absolutely willing to consider, because I do think it stands as a best practice.
Just one thing. I'm saying this because working in the hospital, everybody, the doctors and the nurses have been using the PPE for many years now, more frequently, and we still see some acquiring the disease. And it's not necessarily, because at some point they get so used to use it that steps might be missing. So that's why I'm talking about there must be a risk, and if we can screen them just periodically,
Yes, point well made, point well taken, and I think it's part of the process moving forward. Dr. Schechter.
Thanks. I think I have a last question. I'm happy to talk to you about that other thing later because I saw a lot of heads going this way and I may think differently, but
Okay.
don't test if screening, we should let people know what the screening questions are and they screen themselves. We don't test everybody in the medical situation routinely, even if they're with coronavirus patients. So we need to let people know how they reduce their risk and what the symptoms are. But testing is a false sense of security. But we can have that later if you want to, and I'm happy to hear about people who have another opinion on that.
And my suggestion was not really testing, because I agree it's not necessary to test everybody, but there will be more like a self-assessment questionnaire.
Very important. Good, excellent point.
So to that point, I know you're going to ask a question, Dr. Schechter. So I said it a long time ago, almost an hour and a half ago. The protocol. So when we talk about a temperature taking at home, for example, as a recommendation, it's not only that. We're going to empower our parents, our students, and our staff with checklists, things to consider to do at home, and decisions to be made should you check that one box. Who to call, what to do. That is probably one of the most effective ways of self-monitoring based on what you feel, and your own detection, elevated temperature, or anything else, exposure to somebody with whom you may have had contact that may be a concern. So yes, that we're going to do. That's why I defer to the medical experts as to whether frequency of testing would be an additional beneficial strategy. And I think that I just heard an opinion. I think we'll tease this out a little bit more in a sidebar conversation to follow. Was there, Dr. Schechter?
Yeah, I had my last question. Thank you. I know that you're putting a lot of attention on the most vulnerable children, including perhaps different mask use for kids who are ESL or hearing impaired, et cetera, at least those who are diagnosed with that. And I hope we could educate all of our adults in the area that those who are not diagnosed, who might be hearing impaired, will have more trouble now because the masks will reduce what they hear and will further reduce the cues that they have in terms of reading facial cues. And some of these kids may look like they're not paying attention, they're not understanding, they're not getting it. And there may be more kids who don't succeed in school that way. So I hope we heighten our alertness to find these children, get them screened, tested, et cetera, in this new environment.
Absolutely. That's been a topic of conversation with staff. Not only that element, which is critically important, so that the screening, detection, early detection, and diagnosing, but also for all children, particularly the younger ones. The wearing of a mask, this is why in the school environment, the wearing of a mask will significantly impair a teacher's ability to teach a child, phonemic awareness, pronunciation of vowels, sounds, even social expressions, right? And that's something that we are navigating through, even going that far. And I think it was actually with Marie that recently, we were talking about, how to get around. So in a setting where the social distancing in one specific classroom may not necessarily be ideal, maybe less than 6 feet, therefore you're wearing a mask. How do you get around that? That's where, it's one of the appropriate utilizations of the screen. Is it better to have a screen in front of the teacher so that the children can see the facial expressions, the enunciation, the projection? So that's one of the elements, but I just thought I would add this to the point that you just made. Absolutely important. Ms. West, great to see you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Carvalho. I just want to express on behalf of the Miami-Dade County PTSA, we will support the decisions of this work group and the school board and do our best to educate our community on what needs to be done for a successful or as successful as possible reopening. But I do have a question. When we were talking about those who responded to the first survey, we had over 100,000 respondents representing 155,000 of the students. This is less than 50% of our population. How are we going to address the 200,000 that we did not reach when the results of the upcoming survey are so critical to the opening of our schools plan?
Yeah, so good point and good question. Number one, thank you for your comments. The PTA PTSA has been an indispensable partner to our work for so many years. So the initial survey actually came out with a level of accuracy that exceeded just the expectation under an appropriate sampling. It was actually a super sample, which was the intent of that survey. It was not to actually get a personal opinion from every single person. The fact that we got, I believe it was 110,000 respondents, representing 150,000 children, was critical. We compared our own data to many other districts across the country where they got less than, significantly less number of responses to the surveys that they put out there. But that was meant as a statistically valid sampling that exceeded our expectations, because you could have gotten probably an accurate gauge of parents' guidance on options if you had, in a representative way, sampled 5,000 people. You probably would have gotten the same type of distribution. But you're right. That is why, to your point, Sandra, and with the intention of really getting now, not only information, but a declaration of an option. That's why now these school-specific surveys that parents, and we'll be providing all this information very, very quickly in all the 3 languages, and parents will have an ability to answer these surveys. When it's published, I believe, I don't want to be wrong, I believe July 11th. Is that the correct date, Ms. Brown, Marie, or correct?
Yes, the surveys will be open until the 10th of July.
10th of July. So, Sandra, that is our intent now. Now, it's not just a matter of having a super sample to give us an idea where parents are gravitating in terms of options specific. There are personal, professional restrictions or concerns about returning to school or not. This now is going to be very accurate because it is going to target every single parent specific to each school. And next up, we good, Sandra?
Yes, that answered my question. Thank
you. Next up, I believe Dr. Linda Brown.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Carvalho. I just wanted to respond to one of the previous speakers. And number one, I agree with Dr. Schechner about the testing and frequency of testing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I do work with the homeless population as well, and that's both the students and the adults. And we have people that are trying to test themselves every week. That's ludicrous. So one of the things that I wanted to say, though, regarding the impact of what has happened, and a lot of our minority of vulnerable populations, the allostatic load that's been placed on them makes them even more vulnerable to what is happening to us every day. So self-monitoring, as you stated, I think is critical. I also wanted to speak to the shields. And as I said before, what I do and work with special needs children is that I think that if we do have that conversation about those head shields for the staff or your teachers so that the children can see the movement of the mouth and the expressions, plus the desk enclosures, because that is a dual opportunity for protection. So I do look forward to this conversation that we could talk about that, especially in those cases where these children that are at greatest risk can benefit.
Very good. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and it's 2:59, allowing me less than 1 minute to say 2 things. Number one, on behalf of our chair, Ms. Pearl Tabares-Hampton, the entire board, and I can tell you, the entire board, I believe, is in attendance at this meeting. I see, I know that Dr. Dorothy Bendros-Mendengal is on, Miss Susie Castillo, Miss Maritere Rojas, Dr. Feldman, Dr. Marta Perez, I said Miss Hampman already, Dr. Karp. If I'm missing somebody, everybody seems to be on. And again, the list just keeps, shifting on me. Dr. Gallen's represented. I really want to thank the board for your presence and your patience in listening to this important conversation. I've learned a lot through you. You've instructed me a lot in the process. I think have helped to fashion a set of conditions, protocols, practices, maybe even policies and plans that will serve our community well. So thank you to this working group. I envision already 2 subgroup conversations because there were at least 2 elements that came up. I really want to probe a little deeper, but we are going to, within this timeline that you were exposed to earlier, we're going to go into a special board meeting with our school board this coming Wednesday. And my question, and this is, there's no voting, but it's a matter of consensus, and you can put your little digital hand up or do it the old-fashioned way with 1 hand or 2 hands. And on the basis of the plan that you saw today, the models that we presented today, are we in a position that this is the right approach, the right set of models for us to recommend to the board, obviously with the additional dimensions that keep coming up and will continue to come up, being addressed between now and August 24th? Are we in a position of, okay, I see thumbs up and I see hands up. Okay, very good. I think I'm getting a clear sense that we are good to proceed. Let me once again, having extended by 2 additional minutes, and we have at least 1 attorney here who charges by the hour. Let me really thank you from the bottom of my heart for your expertise, your patience, your wise counsel, your advice, and your courage to take on some issues that are not easy. And I hope that you will monitor the board meeting, should you choose to do so. And I certainly will pass on vigorously the positions that you've declared, the advice that you have provided, and the practices that you have enabled. So thank you very much once again, and have a great day. Now there's so many hands up. I don't know if the hands are just signifying agreement or a desire to, it's a wave of goodbye now. The time is up, Alberto. All right, thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, and we'll be speaking soon. Please be safe.
Thank you. Fabulous weekend.
Thank you
For the opportunity.
Thank
Great
you.
work, Alberto.
And
Staff.
thank you very much to my incredible staff for the work they've done navigating something the likes of which has never been navigated. So to the entire cabinet, support staff, and everybody in between, thank you very much. And I know that level of gratitude comes from the working group members as well. Thank you.
Thank you.